He was known in the city as a man who owned everything that could be bought with money. His name appeared in business magazines and on charity boards and in quiet conversations where power was discussed with careful voices. That evening he entered the hotel ballroom without announcing himself, yet everyone felt the shift when he arrived. The room was filled with soft golden light from large chandeliers and the sound of polite laughter from guests who had spent their lives learning how to belong in places like this. Crystal glasses rested on white tablecloths, and a grand piano stood near the stage as decoration more than an instrument, because no one expected music that night. It was a private dinner for investors, donors, and friends, and everything was meant to stay controlled and predictable across the room. A young waitress moved carefully between tables holding a silver tray. Her name was Alina, and she had worked at the hotel for almost a year. She knew how to keep her eyes low and her steps quiet. She had learned that wealthy guests preferred servers who felt invisible. She wore the standard uniform and her hair was tied back neatly. To everyone else, she was just another employee doing her job, and no one asked where she came from or what dreams she carried. What no one knew was that music had once been the center of her life, before bills and responsibilities forced her to hide that part of herself. The billionaire noticed her not because she wanted to be seen, but because she hesitated for half a second when she passed the piano. Her eyes moved toward it without her meaning to and then quickly away. It was such a small moment that no one else saw it, yet he did. He had spent his life reading people in boardrooms and negotiations, and he recognized the look of something unfinished. As the dinner continued, he watched her quietly as she served drinks and plates. She moved with discipline, yet there was tension in her shoulders, as if she was holding something back later in the evening after speeches and applause, and the comfortable rhythm of expensive conversation. The billionaire stood up and raised his hand. The room slowly fell quiet because when he stood, people listened. He spoke calmly about opportunity and talent and how society often missed what was right in front of it. His voice was controlled and confident, the kind that did not need to be loud. Then he turned slightly and pointed toward the piano and asked if anyone in the room could play it. A few guests smiled politely, but no one moved. It was not that they could not play, but that this was not part of the plan. His gaze then shifted toward Alina, who had just placed a glass on a table nearby. He asked her if she could play the piano. The question cut through the air sharply. She froze for a moment, unsure if he was serious. Dozens of eyes turned toward her and she felt heat rise to her face. She shook her head softly and said she was just a waitress. Her voice was low and respectful because she did not want trouble. She hoped he would laugh and move on. Instead, he asked again, this time more firmly. He said he had seen the way she looked at the piano and that people did not look at objects like that unless they knew them well. The room grew uncomfortable. Some guests shifted in their chairs while others watched with curiosity. Alina felt trapped between honesty and fear. She needed this job and did not want to embarrass herself. She said she used to play a little when she was younger, but it had been years. The billionaire nodded slowly and told her to sit at the piano. His tone was not cruel, yet it carried authority that did not invite refusal. A manager at the side of the room looked panicked but did not interrupt. Alina felt her hands tremble as she walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. She was aware of her uniform and the difference between herself and the people watching her. She had never played in front of an audience like this, especially not one filled with people who judged without speaking. She sat on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. The piano keys looked unfamiliar under the bright lights, even though she had once known them better than anything else. Memories surfaced of a small apartment, an old upright piano, and evenings spent practicing while her mother cooked dinner. That life felt far away now, replaced by long shifts and quiet exhaustion. She wondered why this man was doing this to her, and whether he understood what he was asking. The billionaire stood nearby and told her to play something, anything she remembered. His voice softened slightly as if he sensed her fear. The room was silent now, not with anticipation but with uncertainty. Alina took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. They felt cold at first. She pressed one key, then another, slowly testing the sound. The piano responded with a rich tone that filled the space. A few guests leaned forward without realizing it. At first, her playing was careful and restrained. She chose a simple piece, something she had learned as a teenager. Her hands moved hesitantly as if asking permission. She made a small mistake and flinched, expecting laughter or judgment, but none came. The room remained quiet. As she continued, something inside her began to settle. Muscle memory returned slowly and her breathing steadied. The noise of the room faded from her awareness, and she focused only on the sound she was creating. She did not look at the audience anymore. She looked at the keys and let herself remember why she had loved music in the first place. It had been her escape, her way of speaking when words failed. With each measure, her confidence grew and the music became fuller. The billionaire watched her closely, not with triumph, but with interest, as if he too was discovering something unexpected. By the time she reached the end of the piece, the room was completely silent. No one spoke or moved. Alina lifted her hands from the keys and felt a strange stillness settle around her. She realized that she had just played the piano again, not as a waitress, not as an employee, but as herself. She did not know yet that this moment would change her life, but something had already shifted inside her. She stood up slowly, unsure what would happen next, and looked toward the billionaire, who met her gaze without expression, leaving the room suspended in that quiet moment before everything changed. The silence that followed her final note felt heavier than any applause Alina had ever imagined. She stood beside the piano, unsure where to place her hands or her eyes. Every person in the room seemed frozen, as if the sound had taken their breath and refused to give it back. She expected someone to laugh or clap or speak, but nothing happened at first. Her heart beat hard in her chest, and she wondered if she had done something wrong. The fear returned quickly, reminding her that she did not belong on that stage or in that room. She took a small step backward, thinking she should return to her duties before she caused trouble. Then the billionaire slowly brought his hands together and began to clap. The sound broke the stillness like a crack of thunder. One clap turned into several, and then others joined, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Soon the entire room was applauding, not with polite approval, but with genuine surprise. Alina felt her eyes sting with emotion she did not want to show. She bowed her head slightly out of habit, and instinct, then turned as if to leave. The applause followed her like a wave she did not know how to ride. The billionaire raised his hand again, and the room quieted once more. He thanked her calmly and said that talent like that did not disappear simply because life became difficult. His words were not loud, yet they carried weight. He asked her name, and when she answered, he repeated it slowly, as if committing it to memory. He then asked the guests to take a short break and invited them to enjoy drinks while he spoke privately with her. Murmurs filled the room as people stood and began whispering to one another. Alina felt dizzy as a hotel staff member guided her to a quieter corner near the stage. Her manager approached her with a tense smile and whispered that she had done well and that she should stay calm. Alina nodded, though she did not feel calm at all. She felt exposed, as if a light had been turned on inside her, revealing parts she had kept hidden for years. She wondered if this moment would lead to praise or punishment or something else entirely. The billionaire approached her without his usual crowd of advisors. Up close, he seemed less intimidating, yet more serious. He asked her where she had learned to play. She hesitated, then told him about her childhood lessons, her mother, who worked long hours, and insisted she practice anyway because music mattered. She spoke about how money ran out after her mother became ill and how lessons stopped, and eventually the piano was sold. She did not go into detail because she was not used to being asked about her life by people like him. He listened without interrupting. His expression did not change much, but his eyes stayed focused on her. When she finished, he asked why she stopped playing altogether. Alina explained that after her mother passed, she had to support herself and there was no time or space for music. Pianos were expensive and jobs were demanding, and dreams slowly learned to stay quiet. Saying it out loud made her chest ache. She realized she had not spoken about this part of her life in a long time. He nodded and said that many people confuse survival with living, and that the world often rewarded those who never let go of what they loved. He asked her if she still wanted to play. The question surprised her because she had not allowed herself to think about wanting for years. She answered honestly and said yes, though she did not know how that could ever fit into her life now. He looked toward the piano again and then back at her, and said that sometimes opportunity arrived without asking if the timing was comfortable. He told her to take the rest of the night off, and said her manager would be compensated. Alina protested softly, saying she could finish her shift, but he insisted. The manager quickly agreed, perhaps relieved, perhaps curious. Alina gathered her things, feeling strangely detached, as if the room were no longer real. As she left the ballroom, she could still feel the echo of the piano keys in her fingers. Guests watched her with new expressions, some curious, some respectful, some unsure what to think. Outside the ballroom, the hallway felt quiet and ordinary in contrast. Alina leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to steady herself. She wondered if this would be the last time she ever thought about that performance or the first of something new. She had learned not to expect miracles. Still, something inside her felt awake in a way it had not felt in years. The next morning, she returned to work expecting everything to feel normal again. The hotel lobby buzzed with its usual rhythm of check-ins and luggage carts and quiet conversations. For a while no one mentioned the night before, and Alina began to believe it had all been a strange dream. Then her manager called her into the office and told her that the billionaire had requested a meeting with her later that week. No explanation was given, only a time. and location at one of his private offices, downtown Alina spent the days leading up to the meeting in a state of nervous anticipation. She replayed every moment of that night, wondering what she could have done differently or what he might want from her now. She feared being judged or dismissed. She feared being offered something she could not accept. She feared Hope most of all because Hope had hurt her before. She continued her shift, smiling, politely serving guests who had no idea what was unfolding quietly inside her. On the day of the meeting, she wore her best clothes, modest and clean. She arrived early and sat in the waiting area of a sleek building filled with glass and steel. Everything felt intimidating, from the art on the walls to the quiet efficiency of the staff. When she was finally called in, she took a deep breath and followed the assistant into a large office overlooking the city. The billionaire greeted her and offered her a seat. He asked if she was comfortable and if she needed anything. The formality eased her slightly. He then explained that he had not brought her there to embarrass her or to make a spectacle of her talent. He said he believed that art should be nurtured and that sometimes people needed a push, even an uncomfortable one, to remember who they were. He admitted that his approach had been abrupt, but said it came from instinct, not cruelty. He then asked her what she wanted for her future, not what she thought was realistic, but what she truly wanted. The question caught her off guard. She sat quietly for a moment, then spoke slowly. She said she wanted to play again, to learn properly, to see how far she could go if she gave herself permission. She did not say she wanted fame or wealth, only the chance to try without fear. Her voice shook slightly as she said it. He smiled faintly and said that was a reasonable wish. He told her he was willing to sponsor her education, provide access to teachers, instruments, and time. He made it clear that this was not charity but an investment in potential. He expected commitment and discipline in return. Alina felt tears well up, but she blinked them back. She asked what he expected from her beyond practice and study. He said only that she promised not to waste the opportunity. By doubting herself, the weight of his offer settled over her slowly. She thought of her long shifts, the exhaustion, the quiet loneliness of giving up something she loved. She thought of her mother and the way she used to listen from the kitchen, smiling softly. She realized that accepting this offer would change everything, and that saying no would mean returning to a life that no longer felt complete. She took a breath and said yes. When she left the building, the city looked different. The streets were the same, and people rushed by as always, but something inside her had shifted. She felt fear still, but it was mixed with purpose. She did not know where this path would lead or how difficult it would be. She only knew that for the first time in years she was walking toward something instead of away from it. Alina did not sleep much that night after leaving the city building because her mind refused to slow down and every thought seemed brighter than the last. She kept replaying the conversation again and again, trying to understand how a single evening had redirected her life so suddenly. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt like something meant to stop her. Instead, it felt like a signal that something real was happening. When morning came, she sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment and stared at her hands, the same hands that had carried plates and glasses for years, and she wondered how they would feel once they returned fully to music. Within days, the changes began. She received a call from an assistant who spoke politely and clearly, explaining the schedule that had been prepared for her. There would be lessons several times a week with a respected piano instructor whose name she recognized from old recordings she had once listened to late at night. There would be access to a practice room with a proper grand piano and time set aside only for learning and rest. She was told she could reduce her hours at the hotel gradually and that her basic living expenses would be covered during her studies. Hearing it spoken out loud made everything feel both real and unreal at the same time. Her first visit to the music studio was overwhelming. The building itself felt alive with sound, as if every wall remembered the music that had passed through it. Alina walked slowly through the hallway, listening to distant notes from other rooms. Some were strong and confident, while others were hesitant and searching. She realized she was not alone in starting again or starting late. That thought brought her comfort. When she entered her assigned room and saw the piano waiting there, she froze for a moment. It was polished and beautiful and far better than anything she had ever touched before. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys without playing. The silence felt respectful rather than empty. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting herself feel the moment without rushing it. When she finally began to play, it was simple and slow. She did not try to impress anyone because no one was watching. For the first time in years, she played only for herself. The sound filled the room, and she felt something inside her loosen, as if a knot had been slowly untied. Her instructor arrived shortly after and introduced himself with warmth rather than authority. He asked her to play something she enjoyed rather than something technical. She chose a piece from memory and played it with honesty even when she stumbled. When she finished, she apologized instinctively, but he stopped her gently and told her not to apologize for where she was starting. He said music was not about proving worth, but about telling the truth of where you were in that moment. Those words stayed with her long after the lesson ended. The early weeks were exhausting in a new way. Her fingers ached from hours of practice, and her mind felt stretched by theory and discipline she had not touched in years. There were moments when frustration crept in, and she wondered if she had started too late or if her talent had faded beyond repair. On those days, she remembered the sound of the room falling silent during her performance, and the look in the billionaire eyes not of pity but of certainty. That memory pushed her forward. When motivation wavered outside the studio, her life continued to shift. At the hotel, some coworkers treated her differently after word spread about what had happened. Some were supportive and curious, while others were distant, unsure how to relate to her now. Alina tried not to let it change her behavior. She still worked her remaining shifts with care and humility. She knew how easily resentment could grow when someone appeared to be chosen unexpectedly. She reminded herself that she had not asked for this moment, but she would not waste it either. As time passed, she noticed changes in herself beyond music. She carried herself differently, with more awareness and less apology. She spoke with greater confidence even when her voice shook. She allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond survival. These changes were subtle but meaningful. They showed up in the way she walked through the city, and the way she looked at her reflection in windows. As she passed, the billionaire did not appear often, but he stayed informed. Occasionally, she received brief messages of encouragement through his assistant. He never pressured her or interfered with her lessons. His distance made his support feel genuine rather than controlling. Alina appreciated that more than she expected. It allowed her to own her progress rather than feel like she was performing for his approval. One afternoon, her instructor suggested she attend a small recital where students shared their work in an informal setting. The idea filled her with anxiety. She had not played in front of others since that night, and the memory of it still felt fragile. She worried that the magic of that moment could not be repeated and that trying again might expose her limitations. Her instructor listened patiently and then said that growth did not come from protecting moments, but from building on them. After much thought, she agreed. The recital was held in a modest hall with simple seating and warm lighting. The audience was small, made up of students, teachers, and a few guests. Alina waited backstage, listening to others perform. She noticed how every player carried a different kind of nervousness and pride. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage and sat at the piano, feeling her heart race. She reminded herself that this was not the ballroom, and that no one expected perfection. She began to play, and this time the music flowed differently. It was not fueled by pressure or surprise, but by intention. She felt present in every note. When she finished, there was gentle applause and warm smiles. It was not thunderous or dramatic, but it was real. As she stood and bowed, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This was progress built slowly rather than discovered suddenly. After the recital, she returned home feeling tired but content. She realized that the journey she had started was not about one song or one powerful moment. It was about reclaiming a part of herself piece by piece. The path ahead would be long and uncertain, but it was hers now. She understood that the billionaire had opened a door, but she was the one walking through it step by step with patience, courage, and an honesty she had almost forgotten how to give. As the weeks turned into months, Alina began to feel the true weight of the path she had chosen. The early excitement slowly settled into routine, and routine demanded discipline more than emotion. Every morning she woke before sunrise, not because someone told her to, but because her mind now reached for music before anything else. She practiced scales until her fingers felt stiff, and returned to difficult passages again and again, until frustration softened into understanding. There were days when progress felt invisible, and she questioned whether effort always led somewhere meaningful. Her instructor became more demanding as her skills improved. He pushed her to explore pieces that challenged her emotionally, not just technically. He asked her to play louder when she wanted to hide and softer when she wanted to impress. At times his honesty hurt, but she sensed it came from respect rather than criticism. He treated her not as a waitress who had surprised a room, but as a musician in formation, and that distinction mattered more than praise. With growth came attention, and not all of it was comfortable. Word of her story traveled quietly through music circles, and some people were curious about the waitress who had been lifted suddenly into opportunity. A few invited her to small gatherings to hear her play, while others watched from a distance, unsure if her rise was based on talent or spectacle. Alina felt the pressure of being seen not just as herself, but as a story others wanted to interpret. She struggled with the idea that her past was now part of her public image. One evening, she attended a private dinner at the request of the billionaire, who wanted her to meet a few patrons of the arts. She wore a simple dress and tried to steady her breathing as she entered the room. The environment reminded her of the night everything began, though this time she was not carrying a tray. Conversations paused when she was introduced and polite interest filled the space. She answered questions carefully, trying to be honest without oversharing. She sensed curiosity mixed with expectation. When asked to play, she hesitated briefly, then agreed. The piano stood in the corner, polished and waiting. As she sat down, memories of fear returned, but she reminded herself that she no longer played to survive a moment. She played because it was part of who she was becoming. The music flowed with control and restraint, and when she finished, the response was warm but measured. It was not awe, it was respect, and that felt like a step forward. After the performance, the billionaire spoke with her privately. He told her that progress often felt lonelier than beginnings, and that doubt usually grew louder just before breakthroughs. He advised her to protect her focus and not let others define her worth through comparisons or expectations. His words were calm but direct, and she understood that he was preparing her for a world that could admire and judge in equal measure. Not long after that evening, her instructor suggested she apply for a regional music competition. The idea terrified her. Competitions meant rankings, and rankings meant failure was visible. She feared that losing would confirm the doubts she already carried. She shared her concerns openly, and her instructor listened before saying that avoidance could quietly become a habit. He said the goal was not to win, but to stand on her own effort without excuses. After many restless nights, she submitted the application. Preparation for the competition consumed her days. She practiced with intensity and attention to detail she had never demanded of herself before. Every mistake felt larger now because she knew others would hear it. At times, she cried alone in the practice room, overwhelmed by the weight of expectation, both real and imagined. Yet even in those moments, she returned to the piano because stepping away felt worse than continuing. The day of the competition arrived with gray skies and cold air. The venue was formal and filled with nervous energy. Musicians warmed up quietly behind closed doors, each lost in their own thoughts. Alina waited her turn, listening to distant notes echo through the hall. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage feeling exposed yet grounded. She took a moment before beginning, letting the silence settle around her. Her performance was not perfect, but it was sincere. She felt connected to the music and allowed emotion to guide rather than control her. When she finished, she bowed and walked off stage without looking for reactions. She knew she had given what she could in that moment. That knowledge steadied her regardless of the outcome. She did not win the competition, but she placed high enough to be noticed. More importantly, she received feedback that recognized her musical voice rather than her story. That validation meant more to her than a trophy. She returned home exhausted but proud, and for the first time she felt that her journey was being shaped by effort rather than circumstance. In the quiet days that followed, she reflected on how far she had come. The fear had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled her choices. She understood now that growth required standing in uncertainty without retreating. Music had become not just a dream revived, but a discipline embraced. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, and moments of doubt, yet she also knew she had the strength to meet them, not as a waitress who once played a song, but as a musician still learning, still becoming, and still choosing to move forward. Still becoming and still choosing to move forward. As the season shifted and the air grew warmer, Alina found herself standing at another quiet turning point. Life had settled into a demanding rhythm that left little room for comfort. Her days were filled with practice lessons, rehearsals, and reflection. What once felt like a gift now felt like responsibility, and that responsibility pressed on her with increasing weight. She began to understand that pursuing a calling required not only passion, but endurance and patience in equal measure. The initial support she had received did not disappear, but it became less visible. The billionaire remained a distant presence, offering guidance only when necessary. Her instructor continued to push her, but with less reassurance than before. Alina realized that this was intentional. She was being asked to stand on her own without constant encouragement. At first, this shift made her uneasy. She wondered if she had disappointed those who believed in her, or if this quiet distance meant something was slipping away. There were moments when doubt returned with force. She watched younger students progress quickly and questioned whether her late start placed an invisible limit on her future. She compared herself despite knowing better, and each comparison chipped away at her confidence. On difficult days, she missed the simplicity of her old life when expectations were clear and small. Yet even in those moments, she knew she could not return to who she had been before. The piano had become too deeply rooted in her identity. One afternoon, her instructor asked her to prepare a full solo program for a small public performance at a local cultural center. This was not a competition or a private gathering, but an open event where anyone could attend. The idea unsettled her. Public audiences felt unpredictable and exposed. She feared being judged not only for her music, but for the story people carried with them when they saw her name. Still, She agreed, knowing that growth often arrived disguised as discomfort. Preparation for the performance required a different kind of focus. She had to think not just about technique, but about connection and storytelling. Her instructor encouraged her to choose pieces that reflected her journey, including struggle, resilience, and quiet strength. As she worked through the selections, she felt emotionally raw. Each piece stirred memories she had kept buried, and at times, practice left her drained rather than energized. As the date approached, she found herself withdrawing socially. She turned down invitations and spent evenings alone with the piano. The isolation felt heavy but necessary. She needed silence to hear herself clearly. In those quiet hours, she began to understand that music was not just sound but intention, and that intention required honesty, even when it hurt. The day of the performance arrived with bright sunlight and a calm sky. The cultural center was modest but welcoming, with rows of simple seats and a small stage. Alina arrived early and walked through the empty space, letting herself absorb it. She imagined the room filled with people and allowed her nerves to surface without fighting them. When the doors opened and the audience began to arrive, she stayed backstage, breathing slowly, grounding herself in the present. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt a familiar tightening in her chest, but she did not retreat. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, allowing the room to settle. The first notes came gently and steadily. As she played, she became aware of the audience not as judges, but as listeners sharing a moment with her. The music flowed naturally, shaped by emotion rather than fear. With each piece, her confidence grew. She felt present, connected, and honest. The room responded with quiet attention, and when she finished the final piece, the applause felt sincere and warm. It was not overwhelming, but it was meaningful. She stood and acknowledged the audience with a small bow, feeling a sense of completion she had not expected. After the performance, several people approached her to express appreciation. Some spoke of how the music moved them, while others asked about her background. She answered, simply focusing on the present rather than the past. Among the audience was a representative from a local arts organization who invited her to discuss potential opportunities. The conversation was brief but promising, and it sparked a new sense of possibility. Later that evening, she returned home tired but fulfilled. She reflected on how the performance differed from earlier experiences. There had been no pressure to prove herself or surprise anyone. She had played because she wanted to share something real. That realization brought her peace. She understood that success did not always arrive loudly, and that sometimes it showed up quietly in the form of alignment between effort and purpose. In the days that followed, she resumed her routine with renewed clarity. The doubts still surfaced, but they no longer paralyzed her. She had learned that confidence was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Music was no longer a question mark in her life, but a path she was actively walking. She did not know where that path would lead or how far it would take her. She only knew that she was no longer waiting for permission or validation. She was building something slowly and intentionally. Each note she played carried the weight of her past and the promise of her future. And for the first time, she felt ready to carry both without hesitation. Alina entered a phase of her journey where progress no longer announced itself clearly, and growth felt quiet, almost invisible, yet deeply demanding inside her. Each morning she returned to the piano with determination, but also with questions that had no easy answers. She practiced longer hours now, not because she was told to, but because she felt an internal pressure to meet a standard she could finally see but not yet reach. The music asked more of her than before, and she sensed that it was testing her commitment rather than her ability. Her instructor noticed the shift in her playing. He told her that she had reached a point where technique alone would no longer carry her forward. He explained that musicians often faced a wall where improvement slowed and self-doubt increased. He said this stage separated those who admired music from those willing to live inside it fully. His words were honest and heavy, and she carried them with her long after each lesson ended. Outside the studio, her life felt quieter. Invitations became fewer and conversations shorter. People who once showed curiosity now expected consistency. She felt the weight of being taken seriously and realized that attention faded quickly when novelty disappeared. This did not discourage her, but it forced her to rely less on external reaction and more on internal purpose. She learned to measure success by effort rather than recognition. One afternoon, she received news that unsettled her deeply. A former neighbor contacted her to tell her that her childhood apartment building was being cleared, and that the old upright piano she once played on had been donated to a storage facility. The message stirred memories she had not visited in years. She felt a sudden ache for her mother and the life that shaped her earliest love for music. That evening, she could not bring herself to practice. She sat in silence, remembering the sound of her mother humming softly while cooking and listening from the next room. The following days were emotionally heavy. Alina realized that moving forward did not erase grief, but often brought it closer. As her music grew stronger, so did her connection to the past. She struggled with this tension, unsure how to carry both without becoming overwhelmed. During a lesson, she played with unusual restraint, and her instructor stopped her, gently asking what she was holding back. She did not answer immediately, but then spoke about her memories and the fear of losing them as her life changed. Her instructor listened carefully and told her that memory was not something to protect by avoiding change, but something to honor by carrying forward. He encouraged her to allow her past to inform her music rather than silence it. He suggested she compose a short piece of her own, not for performance, but for understanding. The idea frightened her because composition felt far more personal than interpretation. Still, she agreed, sensing that this task was meant to help her face something unresolved. She began the composition slowly, without structure. At first the notes felt disconnected, but she continued, trusting the process. Over time, a melody emerged, one that felt familiar and intimate. It carried the warmth of home and the quiet sadness of loss. Writing it was emotionally exhausting yet strangely healing. She played it again and again, refining it until it felt honest. For the first time, she was not playing someone else's words, but speaking her own truth through sound. When she shared the piece with her instructor, he listened without interruption. When she finished, he said that this was the kind of honesty that could not be taught. He encouraged her to keep writing and to include the piece in her future performances when she felt ready. Alina felt exposed yet validated. She understood now that music was not only about mastering others' voices, but also about finding her own. Around this time, the billionaire reached out, asking to meet. They spoke over a quiet lunch away from the public eye. He asked about her progress and listened attentively as she described both growth and struggle. She admitted that the path felt harder now than at the beginning. He smiled slightly and said that difficulty often arrived when things mattered most. He reminded her that his support was never meant to remove challenge, but to give her the space to face it. Honestly, he shared that many people he had supported in different fields reached a similar stage where self-belief was tested more than skill. Some retreated and others leaned in. He told her that her willingness to confront discomfort without blame was a sign of maturity. His words did not flatter her, but they steadied her resolve. She left the meeting feeling seen, not as a project, but as a person navigating complexity. As weeks passed, Alina continued composing and practicing with renewed intention. Her music gained depth and her presence at the piano felt grounded. She noticed that audiences responded differently now, not with surprise, but with attention. They listened closely and leaned into the quiet moments. This shift reassured her that she was no longer defined by her origin story, but by her evolving voice. One evening, after a long rehearsal, she stayed alone in the studio long after others had left. She played her composition slowly, letting the sound fill the empty room. She felt a sense of calm wash over her. In that moment, she understood that success was not a single peak, but a series of choices made daily, often without applause. She felt gratitude for the journey, even with its uncertainty. Alina walked home under the evening sky, feeling tired yet steady. She knew there would be more obstacles ahead and moments of doubt still waiting. But she also knew she had learned how to move through them without losing herself. Music was no longer a dream borrowed from the past or a gift given by chance. It was a living part of her identity, shaped by discipline, memory, courage, and quiet persistence. And she was ready to carry it forward, wherever it might lead. Alina entered the next stage of her journey with a calm determination that surprised even her. The fear that once followed every opportunity had softened into awareness rather than resistance. She no longer asked whether she deserved to be here. Instead, she asked how honestly she could show up each day. The piano was no longer an object of escape or proof. It was a place of dialogue where she met herself without masks. Her instructor noticed the change immediately. Her playing had gained a quiet authority. Not louder or faster, but clearer. Each phrase carried intention. Each pause felt chosen. He told her that this was the moment when musicians stop reaching outward and begin listening inward. He challenged her to refine rather than expand. To say more with less. This was harder than learning new techniques because it required restraint and trust. Opportunities continued to appear, but now they came with expectations rather than curiosity. She was invited to collaborate with a small chamber group. Rehearsals demanded precision and cooperation. She had to learn how to blend without disappearing, how to lead without dominating. These sessions tested her patience and humility. She made mistakes and owned them. She listened more than she spoke. Slowly, she earned the respect of musicians who did not know her past and did not care to ask. At home, her life felt simpler yet fuller. She kept a routine that balanced practice, rest, and reflection. She cooked more often and allowed herself moments of stillness without guilt. She wrote music in the evenings, sometimes finishing pieces, sometimes abandoning them halfway. She learned that not everything needed to be completed to be valuable. This gentler relationship with effort helped her sustain momentum without burning out one afternoon. She received an unexpected invitation to perform at a benefit concert supporting music education for underfunded schools. The cause resonated deeply with her. She remembered what it meant to lose access to music when resources disappeared. She agreed to perform and offered to include her own composition. The decision felt bold but right. She wanted to give voice to the experiences that shaped her rather than hide them. Preparation for the concert brought new nerves. Composing was one thing, but sharing original work with a larger audience felt exposing. She questioned whether the piece was strong enough or too personal. Her instructor reminded her that authenticity was not measured by perfection, but by clarity of intention. He told her to trust the work she had done, and the honesty that guided it. The concert venue was larger than she expected, with high ceilings and warm acoustics. Rehearsals echoed through the hall, and she felt the familiar mix of excitement and tension. She watched other performers and felt connected to a shared purpose. This was not competition or display, it was service through sound. That understanding grounded her. On the evening of the concert, she stepped onto the stage with steady breath. The audience filled the space with quiet anticipation. She began with a classical piece played with elegance and control. The response was attentive and respectful. Then she introduced her original composition, briefly speaking from the heart without embellishment. She said it was written for those who loved something deeply and had to let it go and find their way back. As she played, the room felt close and still. The melody unfolded gently, carrying warmth and ache together. She felt present in every note, not performing but sharing. When the final chord faded, there was a moment of silence that felt full rather than empty. Then applause rose slowly and sincerely. She bowed with gratitude, feeling a sense of alignment she had never known before. After the concert, several educators approached her expressing interest in bringing her work to schools and community programs. They spoke about students who needed examples of resilience and creative courage. Alina listened with emotion, realizing that her journey could serve a purpose beyond personal fulfillment. The idea of teaching and mentoring sparked something new within her. She had never imagined herself in that role, but now it felt natural. She discussed these possibilities with her instructor and later with the Billionaire, who continued to observe her progress with quiet pride. They encouraged her to explore this direction thoughtfully, not as a departure from her own growth but as an extension of it. She understood that sharing knowledge did not diminish artistry, but often deepened it. In the months that followed, she began offering workshops alongside her performances. Working with young students reminded her of her own beginnings. Their curiosity and fear mirrored her past. She approached them with patience and honesty, emphasizing effort over talent. She shared her story not as a miracle, but as a process shaped by persistence and support. The work was demanding yet deeply rewarding. Balancing performance, composition, and teaching required careful attention. There were days when exhaustion crept in, and she questioned whether she was taking on too much. She learned to adjust without guilt, setting boundaries and honoring rest. This self-respect became essential to sustaining her work without losing joy. As her calendar filled and her confidence grew, she noticed a shift in how she viewed success. It was no longer tied to recognition or scale, but to integrity and impact. She measured her days by whether she had listened deeply and acted honestly. This perspective brought peace even amid uncertainty. One quiet evening, after a long day, she returned to the studio alone. She played softly, not to practice or prepare, but to reflect. The notes felt like a conversation with her past, present, and future all at once. She felt gratitude for the chance encounter that opened a door and for the courage it took to walk through it. She also felt gratitude for the challenges that shaped her voice and the people who believed in her without trying to define her. Alina knew the journey was ongoing and that clarity would come and go. But she no longer feared that movement. She had learned to trust her ability to adapt and to stay grounded in what mattered most. Music was not something that happened to her anymore. It was something she actively lived. And as she closed the piano and stepped into the night, she felt ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. Alina reached a point where the path ahead no longer felt like something she was chasing, but something she was steadily walking with intention and awareness. The years of effort, discipline, doubt, and quiet courage had shaped her into someone who understood both her limits and her strength. She no longer measured herself against others or against who she once was. Instead, she focused on alignment between her values, her work, and the way she moved through the world. Her schedule was full but balanced. Performances, teaching, composing, and personal practice existed together without competing for dominance. She had learned how to listen to her energy and adjust without guilt. This skill proved just as important as any musical technique. When she felt overwhelmed, she stepped back briefly rather than pushing herself into exhaustion. She understood now that sustainability was a form of respect for both her art and herself. One of the most meaningful changes came in how she related to audiences. She no longer felt the need to impress or explain. She trusted that the music would reach those who were ready to receive it. This trust allowed her to perform with calm presence rather than tension. People often remarked on the sense of ease they felt when listening to her. Not because the music was simple, but because it was honest. Her teaching work expanded gradually. She partnered with community centers and schools, bringing music programs to students who had never touched a piano before. She approached each session with humility, remembering how easily talent could be overlooked when resources were limited. She emphasized curiosity, patience, and consistency rather than perfection. Watching students discover sound and rhythm reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. One afternoon, after a workshop, a young student asked her if it was ever too late to start something meaningful. The question stayed with her long after the day ended. She realized how many people carried quiet regrets and untested dreams simply because they believed timing had passed them by. That evening, she began drafting an idea for a larger program focused on access and encouragement rather than competition or prestige. She shared the idea with her instructor and later with the billionaire who had first noticed her years ago. Both listened carefully and offered thoughtful support. The billionaire expressed interest in helping fund the initiative, but made it clear that the vision and leadership should be hers. This gesture moved her deeply because it reflected trust rather than control. She accepted, knowing that this project felt like a natural extension of her journey. As the program took shape, Alina found herself stepping into leadership in a way she had never imagined. She coordinated musicians, educators, and volunteers, creating spaces where learning felt safe and inspiring. The work was complex and sometimes overwhelming, but it felt purposeful. She learned to ask for help and to delegate without losing clarity. These skills strengthened her confidence beyond music. Public recognition followed quietly. She was invited to speak at events and participate in panels about art, access, and resilience. She approached these opportunities with the same grounded honesty she brought to her music. She did not present her life as a dramatic transformation, but as a series of choices supported by people who believed in potential. This perspective resonated deeply with audiences who were tired of exaggerated narratives. Throughout all of this, she maintained a private relationship with music that remained sacred. She continued to practice alone, without an audience, allowing herself to explore without expectation. These moments kept her connected to the source of her passion. She knew that without this inner space, the external success would feel hollow. One evening, she returned to the same hotel where everything had begun. The ballroom looked unchanged with its warm lights and polished floors. This time, she was invited to perform as a guest of honor at a charity event supporting arts education. As she walked through the room, memories surfaced, not with pain but with gratitude. She remembered the fear and uncertainty of that first night and marveled at how far she had come. When she sat at the piano, she felt calm rather than nervous. She played with confidence shaped by experience and humility. The room listened closely, and when the final notes faded, there was a deep sense of connection. Applause followed, but it felt secondary to the shared silence that lingered afterward. She stood and acknowledged the audience with a gentle smile, aware that this moment was not a conclusion, but a reflection of growth. Later that evening, she spoke briefly, sharing a message about attention, opportunity, and courage. She spoke about how talent existed everywhere but required recognition and support to flourish. Her words were simple and sincere. She did not speak as someone elevated above others, but as someone who had been seen at the right moment and chose to step forward. As the night came to an end, she stepped outside into the cool air, feeling a quiet sense of completion. Not because the journey was over, but because it had come full circle. She understood that the silence she once created with one song had echoed far beyond that room, shaping a life rooted in purpose, connection, and service. Alina walked away knowing that her story was not defined by a single act or by the person who first recognized her. It was defined by what she chose to build afterward with discipline, compassion, and courage. Music had given her a voice, but she had chosen how to use it. And as she moved forward into whatever awaited her next, she carried with her the knowledge that true transformation was not sudden or dramatic, but steady, intentional, and deeply human.